symptoms that are all contained in our Bible, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, Mental Disorders, otherwise known as DSM.
KJV.
Yep. The DSM gives us how to recognize every mental disorder. It doesn't tell us how to treat them. And in my estimation, and this is purely me, I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody else. I believe that those diagnoses are symptomatology. They're not problems. We talk in terms of I have a problem with anxiety, but I think if we change the language and say I have a symptom of anxiety, we want to look to see what the problem is that's giving rise to this anxiety or this depression, the bipolar disorder, the whatever it is, trichotillomania. So what I found is that if we attack one symptom, throw a bunch of coping skills at it, that symptom will go away. And it's good for evidence-based practice because we can measure that and we can quantify it and we can say 6 months after treatment, you're still done, and you can see me wiping my hands on the microphone. Hey, we're good. It worked. Yeah. But what popped up next was something we didn't see. So we took care of your drinking, but now you got anxiety. Take care of your anxiety, now you're depressed. Take care of your depression,
like
now you got therapeutic whack-a-mole is exactly what I call it. And I'd rather unplug the machine.
Right.
I don't want to keep sitting there whacking moles. That's great for client continuity of care and making sure that the bills get paid and stuffing my wallet. But I am not interested in that. As I stated earlier, I want a healthy community. I don't want a bunch of people who are just transmorphing into different symptom presentations. So as much as I like the coping skills, if they're working great. I would want to dig in to find out why you're doing this because I have a fundamental belief that people aren't born broken. It doesn't make any sense. It's not harmonious with nature. So therefore, if you're not born broken, we could reasonably redirect you back to wholesomeness, and this would just go away. So I find that if we're diving deep into people and meeting them, seeing through their outward behavior presentation and meeting them at their true self and their soul and treating that, and it's probably something that doesn't have a diagnostic code attached to it that we can't send up to insurance, like doesn't feel good about oneself, doesn't know where one is going in life, has a lot of trauma history. Those aren't diagnosable conditions. But if we start talking about that, where do you want to be when you grow up? Where are you going in life? Give a sense of meaning and purpose and direction and fulfillment. Then the symptoms just disappear. They go away.
So I kind of hear you saying, let's take a look at this hair pulling. And yes, good coping skills. If it's working, it's working. I'm not here to pull you away from that. But if I can go deeper with the writer, my question is the hair pulling a symptom of something that we don't have a word for yet?
Right.
And as a therapist, if I were working with you, I'd be very curious to get to know you on a deeper level, to better understand why this behavior may have developed in your life.
And if I go to behaviorism, a behaviorist would ask, what's the function of that?
What's the function?
What does it serve? We go to Glasser's 5 needs. Power and control might be one of them. It gives you an outlet, a sense of power and control. I can pull my own hair. It saves me from having to hurt me
this
else.
way.
Sure.
Like a lot of cutters will express that they hurt themselves by cutting because they can't control the hurt from other people or from emotions.
Or how I was taught that in one context, self-harm of any stripe. It could be cigarette smoking. Cigarette smoking is not healthy. It's self-harm.
Sure.
So self-harm of any kind is a quantification, meaning it's a way to box up and label how big am I hurting? How big is psychological pain? We don't know. It's however big you make it. So if I can cut myself and go, that's how much I hurt.
That's
right
how
there.
much I hurt.
And of course, there's the physiological response that endorphins come and serotonin's released and whatnot. And physiologically, it feels good too. So it's a release, but to the question of will I have to use this the rest of my life, I would say no. I don't think that's appropriate. If that were the case, and symptoms or people's psychological distresses could never be completely overcome, and they were just, this is what it is, you're just going to be stuck with it the rest of your life, we'd be out of a profession. Our profession would cease to exist. No one would ever heal. We wouldn't have testimonies of people saying, I used to do this and now I don't do it anymore. And it's not because I've just substituted it with something else. I'm not drinking alcohol anymore. I'm just sucking down 6 pots of coffee and 4 cigarettes a day. Like, I don't know if that's as healthy.
Coped. And actually, to take that concept, Nick, this interesting, obsessive and compulsive behavior, as Jake just said, it's probably a symptom of something deeper. It's probably, affiliated with that. Coping is a great way to begin the journey into healing, but it's probably, we probably don't want you doing the same exact checklist 3 years into your recovery. And recovery is probably the right way to describe this. Coming from an addictions, kind of perspective, this could almost be looked at as a behavioral addiction in a sense. I mean, how do you look at coping skills, and what do you think about how long they should probably be around and ideas like that?
with the coping skills, I would agree first, with what Jake had said, right away, which is that, I mean, at least for the short term, if it's working, then that's great.
That.
You found something that at least, keeps you safe.
Right.
That's a great place to start.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think we need to continue to expand on that. And, like when we talk about addiction, there's always something deeper than that. There's, we talked about trauma. That trauma and addiction go hand in hand. They're so closely tied together that we can't just focus on, what are some ways of dealing with cravings, and that's it.
Right.
And then we're just going to stop there.
Yeah.
We have to get into, what's driving that? What's going on with this trauma? What is it that we are trying to accomplish by getting drunk, by getting high?
Yes.
By allowing things to get out of control.
So this and that, the hair pulling, obsessive hair pulling, can be seen in that same light, which is, and it goes back to what Jake had said. What is the function of this behavior? What does this do for you, consciously or subconsciously? How is this alleviating some kind of suffering? And Jake had brought up the point. This could be a way to measure pain. How hurting were you? I was 3/5 of Jack hurting.
Mm-hmm.
There's a way to say that. Or I was half of my head of hair hurting. And Nick, what I hear you saying is, when it comes to these coping skills, use them, but also, yes, even from a very clear addiction standpoint, we do want to dig deeper underneath this. And so it looks like to the writer here, to the listener, the advice is, yes, keep doing what you're doing, but we do probably want to see you make progress. There might be some coping skills you do for the rest of your life. That might be true. And if that's keeping the tiger at bay, fine. But, Jake, what I hear you saying is, as a therapist, I'm not quite satisfied if that's the way you have to live forever. I would like to continue doing the work.
I think that comes through in the final question, or the final statements here. Is this a good way to cope? I'm not going to judge that. If it's working, it's working. It's working so far. Inherently implies, will it continue? Mm-hmm. And then, will I have to use this the rest of my life? What else should I be doing? Yeah. So the writer inherently understands that this is not going to work forever.
Right.
And I think we all have the intrinsic idea that we are bigger and deeper than we realize. And so these are good questions to ask, because it implies that there's something greater that can be done. Similarly, we wouldn't want somebody on painkillers is a good example, but we wouldn't want them in medication the rest of their lives. The reason we use a symptom alleviation, coping skills, medication, whatever alleviates the symptoms, is so that talk therapy can take root and behavioral change, real actual behavioral change, can take effect. We don't believe that people should use some external substitute as a crutch to manage their stuff forever, because our bodies just won't hold up. I mean, even working out, there are people who work out into their 80s, but you're not working out at the level you were in your 20s. Yeah. And so if you're relying, quote, you can't see the air quotes because we're on the radio, but if you're relying on that coping skill, and then that coping skill isn't available, then what? Right. And so this is a nice list, but what if these things aren't available? What if you're in the middle of a class at school? You can't masturbate there. You can't pet the dogs. You can't eat a snack. You can't
frowned
take a shower.
upon. It's frowned upon.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Depends on the class.
Yeah. If you're at UNR, they'll allow it.
But truly, and I'm of the opinion that if you have the insight enough to use a coping skill, you have the insight enough not to do the behavior and to channel that
That's a good point.
Stress somewhere else.
That's a really good point. Yeah, and I think that the way I almost would say this is it unfair to describe coping skills as training wheels. That it's entirely appropriate when you're learning how to ride a bike. In fact, it's strongly encouraged when you're learning how to ride a bike, and it's a good safety mechanism.
I don't want to face on the pavement a bunch of times to learn how to balance.
Yeah. It's a safe way to begin the ride. But then eventually we probably want to experiment with taking those off and seeing how far you get on your own and learning some new skills, which is the riding of the bike, and that's the living of the life. Great question, great topic. So thankful to these new listeners, and really encourage you to stay with it. And if I could throw in one, side argument here, I noticed that you had 12.
Case closed.
It's case closed. I noticed you had 12 little things. I would, encourage you to even throw dice, throw dice and say, I got 7. That's what I'm going to do. That's another way to kind of play with it. But again, coping skills are something that you should do, can do, will do, and we can also go deeper. We can also do more.
But I think I heard you saying another thing that when you deal with anxiety, we all have our ways of dealing with this stuff. And part of what we want to do is normalize the conversation too, that part of human behavior, going back to the previous question, is what's a normal human being? Well, we all have the capacity to do everything that any other human has done. If it's human nature, you have that nature as a human. So when you were talking about dealing with anxiety at one point, you started counting things because it pulled you from your limbic system into your cognition, which then diminished the anxiety.
Yes.
Anxiety is usually driven by fear or excitement. And so if you're cognitively throwing dice and counting what you got, that would diminish the limbic behind the anxious hair pulling. Is that what I'm understanding?
I think so. And, so what we're discussing here, I think the way I compare the human brain is sometimes to a smartphone. There's like software, there's firmware, there's hardware. But the thing that, and we'll have to bring this to another episode, but this idea of neuroplasticity, the brain changing over time. I think coping skills help the brain change over time physically. Yeah. So for me and my anxiety, it began by counting and going into more of a cognitive mode. And then over time, I didn't really have to reach for that. It was like my brain just sort of knew to go in that direction when faced with something very emotional or
Which is why we don't want to eliminate coping skills altogether.
Yeah, they're welcome.
I'm never saying that. I'm not saying that.
Yeah, you're not going to hear therapists say either or a lot. We usually say both and. And I think this is a great set of skills. Do more of that. Thank you so much for writing in. And guys, if you have questions out there, you come down to podtherapy.net. You send those in anonymously, or you can email us or put us on the Facebook. Facebook.com/podtherapy. Lots of great places where you can send it our way. We would love to hear from you.
Yeah, and thank you to our guests.
Yes, thank you to our special guest.
I appreciate you guys having me. And we kid each other and we laugh and we giggle and we poke each other in the ribs. But honestly, this is such an honor to be able to hang out with other well-functioning, highly ethical, driven people who are stepping out of their zone to give something to the community for completely free so that we can all get better. I just, anytime, seriously, when we can do this over the phone or something.
Absolutely.
I'm still trying to find a good phone recorder that doesn't sound like
I've been looking
robot.
for an opportunity to go up to Tahoe, so this is now our excuse.
I have a spare bedroom and we're 40 minutes away.
Done.
Should be able to tax deduct that, I believe.
I think that counts.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
All right. That's all the time we've got for this week's session. Thank you to those who contributed to our show today. We really appreciate it. Remember, pod therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Help us reach others by sharing this episode. You can find us at facebook.com/podtherapy or on Twitter @podtherapyguys.
Do you want to add your own advice to today's questions? Post your thoughts at podtherapy.net and join the conversation. I'm Nick Tangeman.
I'm Jake Whiskerchen.
You wish.
And that's Jim Jobin. Thanks, and we'll see you for your appointment next week.
Go Wolfpack.